Welcome to the Red Nation podcast. We have some really special guests today. We have Rawan and Fathi from Decolonized Palestine. Do you guys want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. My name is Fathi Nemer. I am the Palestine Policy Fellow at Al Shabaka, and I'm the co-founder of decolonizedpalestine.com.
And I'm Rawan Masri. I translate, I write, and I work for the Palestine Museum, and I'm also a co-founder of Decolonized Palestine.
And Rawan, can you tell me what the Palestinian Museum is?
The Palestine Museum is right next to Birzeit University in Birzeit. It's supposed to be the space of presenting Palestinian culture and history. It's not an art museum, but it does feature a lot of art from local artists. The last exhibition was about the coastal peoples and the view before and after the Nakba. And the next one should be about Palestinian music.
Very cool. I think I visited that when I was there.
Oh, really?
Yes, but I have some I have a lot of questions. There's a lot going on. I don't want to kind of get ahead of myself, but maybe you both can start about talking about Decolonized Palestine, the idea behind it, and sort of why you started this website.
Well, honestly, it was a labor of love. It took us years to put things together. Actually, the first idea started as maybe kind of like a YouTube show, kind of like debunking myths. But then we thought the way to get it most spread around was to just have like this kind of repository, because we kept seeing the same, propaganda and talking points being regurgitated over and over. And we frankly got tired of just keep debunking them. So we thought, what if we created a resource where we could just link people to something instead of having to go through everything every single time. And it kind of grew from there. So now we have, it's grown a good amount since it launched. It's basically like almost 120,000 words by this point. It's basically a book. And we're pretty proud of it. I think, Rawan's section is about the rainbow washing. That's her baby. She's very proud of it. I'm very proud of her for it. About all the different kinds of ways Israel tries to, wash its reputation through, LGBTQ rights or greenwashing through its environmental actions. My baby is the myths section. Which is a myths database about the most popular myths. But there's also a bunch of other stuff that we both worked on, such as the FAQ, the reading list, the introduction articles. We even had some input from wonderful scholars such as Stephen Salaita about the introduction section. So it was really just a communal work on labor of love that took us a while to put together, but we're proud of what we put out.
And it's born out of our experiences as him maybe here and Germany, me in the US and here, of activism, of how we make the demands that we're making, how we kind of understand our political horizons, how our cat
is screaming, sorry.
I think, knowing your history or knowing the ideological underpinnings of their talking points is how we can refute it more, strongly and more, I think, even passionately, and, paves the way for this decolonized future that made us name the website Decolonized Palestine.
Yeah, and it's while it's mostly focused around Palestine, a lot of the concepts that we tackle and talk about, like nationalism or settler colonialism or ethno-nationalism, these are all pertinent to more than just the Palestinian, context or the Palestinian cause. These are things that we've seen all over the world. For example, concepts like terra nullius have been used all over the world to basically expel and exploit the resources of indigenous peoples all over the world. So there's like a direct line and continuum from European settler colonialism to the founding of the Zionist state and Zionism as an ideology in general.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. I've been poking around on the website. We actually linked it to our recent website launch, indigenousforpalestine.org, as a resource list, and we're attempting to create sort of links and resources to the indigenous experience, not only in Turtle Island but across the world, to the decolonial project that's happening in Palestine. And I want to kind of, again, I don't want to jump ahead of myself, because decolonization is a loaded word, And it often doesn't apply to a settler colonial context in terms of how it's articulated within international law and the right to decolonization. And specifically, they call it like the blue water thesis. So, what that means is the colonizing occupier or the colonizer has to be separated by a body of water. It seems very arbitrary, but it also seems to be utilized in ways, for settler colonial situations, especially like in Canada, the United States, the Anglo colonies. But in the context, of Palestine, I was introduced to settler colonialism actually first through studying Palestine and not through studying, Indigenous history here in North America. It wasn't a term that I, even in activist circles, I never really encountered. We definitely encountered the term decolonization, but it's also really fascinating because we have other terms like apartheid to describe the Israeli Zionist occupation, which I think is fascinating because apartheid is a technology of settler colonialism. It isn't necessarily the kind of system, right, of dispossession. And one of the biggest pushbacks that we actually get as Indigenous studies scholars, especially not just in the academy, but even in the mainstream, is over the question of settler colonialism. There might be an acknowledgement that settler colonialism happened in Canada, the United States, because settlers in Canada, the United States are in a position of power where they can say, oh, well, this happened, but, and it's lamentable, but there's nothing we can really do about this. But we can't apply that situation to Palestine because that would be like saying Israelis are colonizers, and this is not a colonial situation. I mean, this is the argument. Like even my colleagues have said this, and this is a direct quote from one of them. He's an anthropologist. He said, "This risks anti-Semitism," which is kind of hilarious to say, especially in the context that he's like literally a settler by law on my lands, telling us that if we make a comparative case for settler colonialism, that we are somehow anti-Semitic. And what I'm saying here, though, is that like the argument that gets deployed against Indigenous people in this context is to say, well, aren't Jewish people Indigenous? Weren't they there before Arabs? Weren't they there before Muslims? That's the argument. And I don't want to put you on the spot on that, but it's something that keeps coming up. I have my own answers to this, but I'd like to hear what you all have to say.
Yeah, great. That's a lot of good jumping points. If I could start off, because I was rereading for today parts of again Stephen Salaita's internationalism, it was very interesting to me how he brought up, again, as you were saying, apartheid is it shouldn't be seen as the framework, but just as one of the tools of settler colonialism, because our conception of liberation, integral island and here is not, for example, more Indigenous peoples in Congress or more Palestinians in the Knesset. It's kind of rejecting these Western colonial notions of citizenship and sovereignty and human rights, their conception thereof. So it's good to recognize that so we can move beyond it. I don't know, do you want to add to
There's a kind of mixing a lot when it comes to the Zionist colonization of Palestine, because they tend to use Zionist and Jew interchangeably, and this is the trap. Basically, this is the very big problem. No Palestinian would deny that there's Jewish history in Palestine. I mean, up until the Balfour Declaration, afterwards, you could not distinguish, Palestinian Jews from Palestinian Christians from Palestinian Muslims. One of our most famous festivals is called the Nebi Rubin, which is the prophet Reuben, which is a Jewish prophet, and it was like a big festival in Palestine, which ceased to be celebrated after the Nakba. The difference is that the indigenous Jewish Palestinian people even looked like as too Arab almost by the Zionist settlers. When we talk about the Zionist settlement, we're talking about this phenomena that started from Western Europe and some in Eastern Europe, proto-Zionist movements, but we don't need to go into too much detail, that started in the late 1800s to establish a homeland in Palestine for this new settler group that are coming from abroad. We're not talking about the Jewish people that were already here that wanted their own homeland. No, because they already were at home, and there was no nationalism at the time anyway. Their concept of, like, we didn't have the concept of nations, like each ethnic group needs its own country. Like this like only barely started penetrating the Middle East like in the 20s and the 30s. Like actually when the Zionist settlers came from abroad to do this, this is why they were so successful, because nobody else was thinking in those terms. When they started like purchasing tracts of land to have these like little exclusive settlements and colonies, and they called them colonies at the time, by the way. It's like, this is not our language. If you actually go back to the language of the original Zionist settlers from the late 1800s, colonialism was not a taboo. Like actually they justified them being more deserving of Palestine was because they are settlers. They want to bring civilization to the Middle East. They actually, like, verbatim, they said it's a bulwark against barbarism and against the Asiatic hordes. Like, this is literally the same language used by, blood and soil ethno-nationalists in Europe at the time. And that's where the ideology of Zionism originated. So when we say that Zionism is colonialism, it's because this like subset, by the way, Zionism at the time was not accepted worldwide by all the Jewish people of the world. This was a small group of Jewish people worldwide who accepted this, and it's known that especially leftist and socialist and communist Jewish people around the world, they were against this idea of like this ethno state. So yeah, and so when we talk about Zionism as colonialism, we're talking about this specific group that came in under the shadow of the English bayonet, and they came under the sponsorship of the British to establish an imperialist outpost that would be supportive of the West and the British, and that's the only reason it exists nowadays anyway.
And to add, it's always just
sorry.
And to add, it's kind of important to say, what this rhetoric used to be more publicly acceptable. The first settlers did not show up saying that falafel is Israeli and wearing a kufiya with like the colors of the Israeli flag and doing all these things that we're seeing today. They're just ingratiating themselves to what is popular now, or more, because to be more tenable to the kind of people who are progressive and in these spaces, and trying to kind of win them over through ignorance. And hopefully I will eventually write brownwashing, but when because we see this now, but when I started compiling the list, I saw that, in some university campuses, there's been more of these like actually pretty far right Israeli groups putting pictures of depicting someone wearing traditional Jewish garb next to a Native American or next to a Kurdish person, next to all these things, trying to again put forth that image. And this is why I pulled up the 8 stages of white settler colonial denial. I think this is just a really great shorthand way of people to kind of understand how this works. So it's like we said, we mentioned terra nullius, like they didn't exist, and if they did, they were the idea, doctrine of discovery, they didn't use the land, or great chain of being, if they did, they didn't deserve it. If they did, they lost it. Might is right. These kind of reactionary ideas, or that it's too late. It doesn't matter anymore. And even if it does matter, or this idea that if it does matter, we need to move on. And then finally, this is where I think we're kind of are with this rhetoric of Zionist settlers being indigenous. Is if we can't, we are you. So it's the way to erase that history. It's a way to claim this moral right that's not theirs, and I think it's very insidious.
Yeah, and I think it's something that's important to emphasize is that the problem was never the question, for example, of Jewish refugees coming to Palestine and just becoming Palestinians or such. Because Palestine, if you actually look at it over the history, it's been like an incredibly popular destination for refugees from a lot of places all over the world before the Second World War. We have we have an Armenian quarter, we have a Sudanese quarter, we have Indian Palestinians, we have all these kinds of, every pilgrim that came to Palestine and chose to stay, they're welcome. We have Bosniak Palestinians, but the difference is that they consider themselves Palestinians. They integrated themselves. The difference with the Zionist movement that came is that they never wanted to integrate. Like one of the Zionist founders, Osushkin, said, we are here to be the landlords, like verbatim. Like he's not here to become part of the population. And that was never the issue, even before the Nakba. And on the partition plan, there were lots of proposals for one state with equal representation of, the Jewish settlers and the Palestinian Arabs, even though the Jewish settlers were a minority. Like that was a very generous offer, in my opinion. And was still rejected because having even the partition was seen as too small for the Zionist Yishuv. They wanted it all, and there's so much. Like this is the thing. Like there's almost like, a cartoon villain sometimes where they talk about this stuff so openly and so plainly, just for like 100 years later to be people like, oh no, this is an indigenous liberation movement. It's like, just read your founding documents. It's not that difficult. You have all this knowledge at your fingertips, but you're just, this is willful ignorance at this point.
Yeah, and I think even taking advantage of uh, the complicated question of whiteness and race in general, and instead trying to turn into kind of like trite oversimplifications about, oh, you're saying that these settlers are white, but how can Jewish people be white when there's anti-Semitism, when there's persecution? Taking advantage of how obviously when they were marked for death during the Holocaust, Jews were not seen as white to the Nazi project, but kind of obscuring or limiting the ways which over time, for example, in the US, they became absorbed into whiteness, I would argue, because of Zionism, because they were appealing to American conceptions of sovereignty and American colonial doctrine and American ideas of taking over a land via violence.
Yeah, they called themselves pioneers, literally. Like, they wanted to tame the land. Like, literally, they used that and they compared it to the Red Indians. Like, literally, it's so obvious and so open. Like,
so of course I think we can't even fully understand Zionism without understanding the colonization of the Americas.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 8 stages of settler colonial, was it 8 stages
of white settler colonial denial? I don't know. I always just see it circulating around. I really love stuff like this where I want to print it. Actually, that's what I should.
It just reminds me. I always have, like, whenever I have these, I have all these flashbacks of where I've been. And the first time I ever encountered or saw, like, Elizabeth Warren, for example. There's a point to this story, but the first time I ever saw her speak, I was in 2014, and I was there to protest because she literally verbatim copied the IDF press release in justifying the genocide in 20. There's been multiple sort of genocidal acts, like, of war enacted on Gaza, and I was there in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the person who introduced her was Deb Haaland, who became, who is currently the Secretary of Interior, the first Indigenous person to occupy that position. But I was there protesting her, like, Elizabeth Warren, because she was just such a rabid, supporter of genocide at that moment in time. And I never knew who Deb Haaland was. It never clicked in my mind until later. She ran, she was the chair of the Democratic Party for New Mexico. She's Laguna, from the Laguna Pueblo. And I remember I was sitting and listening to, I was being interviewed by Jeremy Scahill. It's a long story, but we had to listen to the news because we were recording in this radio station, and Deb Haaland was on the radio saying, and this isn't a verbatim quote, but she said, as she was running for Congress, she said, in 1948, Native Americans in the state of New Mexico got the right of vote. Our liberation is tied to the liberation and the independence of the Jewish state of Israel. And I was just like, it was like one of those moments where it's like the record, scratches, like, what's going on? And, she was speaking, at a synagogue, a local synagogue. And I was just sitting there, like, just totally blown away about how, Native elected officials have to make these sort of gestures you point this out in the section on red washing, and which, by the way, I thought was interesting about, red washing in two senses of the word, the indigenous sense, but then also the left sense, in saying that, the original sort of like kibbutz projects and things like that were sort of part of this progressive labor Zionism. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make here is that, like, these two kind of figures, Elizabeth Warren and Deb Haaland, kind of represent these kind of the spectrum, I guess, or the multitude of settler colonialism as it exists here in Turtle Island, but then also as it exists in Palestine. On one hand, you have Elizabeth Warren, who advanced her career by claiming to be an indigenous person, literally a white woman claiming to be indigenous, faced almost no repercussions to her political career because of that. And then on the other hand, you have an indigenous person who has to make overtures to AIPAC the Zionist project just to get elected. I'm assuming that's, she's making these calculations. Maybe she does believe those things. I don't know. I've never talked to her about it, but I've challenged her. We publicly challenged her about it. But it's just fascinating that these two sort of worlds kind of come together in this moment in time. And to say that like Indigenous, like this whole idea of like innocence, like Indigenous people aren't sort of quote unquote natural allies to other groups. This is something that has to be raised through consciousness, right? And there is a connection, I believe, between Indigenous people and in Palestine, for reasons we can get into here. But I was just curious about your thoughts on this because, Rawan, you mentioned that you had read Stephen Slaida's not decolonizing Palestine, internationalism, which does a comparative approach between American Indian studies specifically and what could be called Palestinian studies. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that and like why there should be more sort of conversation, because Stephen in that book makes this claim, and I thought it was interesting. He said, Palestinian studies has kind of been, an odd fit within, the broader sort of area studies of Middle East studies because of this kind of unique settler colonial situation. And it may have more affinity with, a discipline like American Indian studies than it would with these other sort of, forms of regional studies in the Middle East. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that because I have some perspectives on that, but I also, I like this dialogue that we're having in terms of like decolonizing Palestine and Turtle Island.
Yeah. I think a lot of the book is really instructive. I believe that the solidarity continuing to be material is really great for us. I think again, as I was saying, we can't understand Zionism without understanding that settler colonial tradition that made it a feasible political project. And this is kind of anecdotal almost, but I heard two different things that made me think of kind of the arguments against, indigenous decolonization in Americas from two people in Gaza. One was a woman saying, I don't care if they kill everybody but 10 people in Gaza. We're still going to free Palestine. I found that interesting because sometimes I think there's this focus on numbers or demographics because, obviously the Zionist state is really obsessed with demographics and how it makes it really obvious or palpable what they are doing. But I think it shows that, we can reject that because it's not about these numbers. It's not about appealing to these kind of like, I know this idea of like, oh, if it's a democracy, then everyone who is here can vote for this. It's just, no, this entire system is illegitimate. And somebody else, I believe Mustafa al-Masri, who's a psychiatrist in Gaza now, and he said something like, thank you for all your grief-stricken messages about how it's been, like basically saying as if you failed us and it's too late, but please step aside, we still have work to do. So I think, what this book also just inspired me to do is reject these ideas of seeing the natives as a lost cause or accepting American settler colonialism forever, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't think we can actually have a free Palestine while American empire is still functioning. And it would be very difficult because of how the Israeli state has been propped up by that support. And also just got this concept that he mentions from an indigenous scholar of survivance, like survival and resistance, kind of rejecting conceptions of us being victims. And so that's kind of what I had in mind. For Elizabeth Warren, I guess it really is. It's that term pretendian, I guess, that I've heard, which I found interesting. It's again, I think trying to make those moral claims, trying to be made like untouchable in progressive circles. Like it's almost, I want to say it's kind of childish. Like, oh, like
it's exploited.
Like it's exploitive. It's also like, I know who you are, but what am I? Kind of like, oh, okay, well, the leftists and the progressive people are with indigenous people are increasingly understanding that land back is something that we should be a part of, and for the future, our future against climate change and the ravages of capitalism. It's like you saw that in just in the most shallow, cynical way possible, twisted that.
It is very shallow and very cynical. And I think that's a lot of like the exploitation of identity politics today. I think it originally started from a good place, but I think it's since been co-opted and used almost like a force field to silence people. I think it's important to emphasize that we can't essentialize different peoples or nations because they're not a monolith and they're going to think different things, and their material context is going to dictate how they look at life and how they see life. And this, people are not born to think just because of their genetics a certain way. There are certain material realities that enforce or maybe influence how we think. Even when it comes to Palestine, there were Jewish members of the Palestine Liberation Organization, and there were Muslim Bedouins who fought with the Zionist militias in '48. It's not about like peoples against, or religious groups against each other. It's about interests. It's about material reality. It's about how you approach, how you grow up, what your interests are. And I think this is something that needs to be, tackled because lately, there's been over the last 20 years or so, there's been a very vicious campaign against Palestinian liberation in the Arab world. And, Palestinians are born with this whole, all Arabs are brothers and sisters. And, so we thought for the longest time, and we still do think, by the way, but this thing that we took for granted that people, just because they're Arab, they're going to grow up to be pro-Palestine and support Palestinians. It is showing that these, decades of indoctrination, anti-Palestinian racism are slowly, eroding this. And a lot of things that you think they'd understand about the struggle, it becomes clear that they don't understand. And if we're talking this way about Arabs, then for sure people around the world are also very susceptible to being, brainwashed or having their opinions changed or eroded over time. Even when, we share the same interests, when we share the same enemy being, world imperialism, or that the weapons that are used against us are tested on us are eventually going to make themselves to be used on you. For example, drones that shoot gas canisters, they were first tested on Palestinians. And if they show up soon in the US, well, you know where they came from. So it's like our this divide and rule or divide and conquer strategy that's being used to kind of separate the peoples of the world and try to change their we call it kay al-wa'i, almost like ironing of consciousness in Arabic. Like they're ironing away at the consciousness, trying to bleed it out. This is something that's very serious, and we see it. And I don't think anyone's genetic background is going to be a shield for that. And people from all backgrounds, actually, I think the young Jewish movement in the United States right now, like the young Jewish Americans are very strongly in favor of Palestine more and more every year. The younger they get, the more in support of Palestine they are. And these are people that are also brought up like to see Israel as a kind of natural, important thing and part of their identity, and they reject that after they learn more about it. So I don't think we can essentialize the views of people, and I think we should be wary of assuming people have certain positions because of their background or their ethnicity. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people have been falling into lately over the last few years. And I think it's become very cynical, this weaponization of identity.
I think I want to ask maybe as like a little bit of a thought exercise, if you will. But I don't know, Nick, if you saw that photo of two Israeli soldiers, and one is proposing to the other, and then behind them are dream catchers. What is this about? Like, it was fascinating to me that it was this, appropriation of not even of Palestinian culture. How they just, I don't know. My initial thoughts are it's appealing to this kind of idea of maybe even a little bit that trans rave and these kind of and the attire that we saw from some of the people there. I wonder if it's kind of it feels that the original Zionist culture that was proposed of, there's this ideal white strong Jew who's not a victim. When that becomes more and more or less easy to swallow over time, if that's why it kind of pushes this grasp onto anything spiritual or actually cultural and deep. Like, I don't know. I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on that.
I think it's a lot more. You're making it like sound a lot more deep than it actually is. I think it's just like it's just shallow. I think it's maybe not so much an appropriation of indigenous culture as it is just American culture, who appropriates these things and takes them out of context, and then it becomes sort of a decontextualized, empty thing for consumption. And it's more of a European thing. more of a settler, a European settler thing than anything else. And I think that's what it speaks to, is just the kind of vacuity or the vacuousness of the kind of like a new age culture. I didn't, when I was there, I never spent a lot of time in the occupied 48. But one thing that it was fascinating to me when I was in Jerusalem was that it felt like Disneyland, not the place, but the people who were there. They were there to consume. They were mostly Americans. I heard English. I heard a lot of Southern accents from the south of the United States. And they were there to consume a specific version. Like it was almost like Disneyland, for a biblical Disneyland, so to speak. And we had a Palestinian archaeologist who was guiding us through, and we went to visit Al-Aqsa Mosque. But I was raised a Christian, and I had felt so alienated, because we read about these things in the Bible, and we read about this, this place, and where Jesus was born, and even visiting Bethlehem versus Jerusalem was like almost night and day. To me, it seemed like a completely different, countries. I mean, it was, it is in many respects, but it was just fascinating, because my mom was a very devout Christian, and she would talk a lot about, these things. I'm not a Christian anymore, but it was I grew up listening to these stories, and when I visited the holy sites, it wasn't like that they weren't devoid of meaning, but the way that they were being consumed by the people, the tourists there, it seemed very similar to what it almost seemed like the United States, to be honest. And then just listening to our Palestinian tour guide, who was, talking about how, they had to wipe out the Moroccan quarter just to have the Wailing Wall. This is completely artificial, created sort of archaeology. And it just reminded me a lot of what the United States is, because if you think about the architecture of the United States, what is the architecture? Like, what is it known for? If you have a US passport and you look in the back, it's like, oh, these are the symbols of, America. It's mostly natural formations, which are sacred sites to Indigenous people, such as the Grand Canyon, the grasslands, and
Mount
it's
Rushmore.
also a really oh God, don't
Sorry,
trigger me.
it's one of the more upsetting things the more I think about it.
I honestly, like, I don't know, like, how I would even cope with that. Like, imagine, like, for example, the Aqsa Mosque, and they have like Ben Gurion's face on it. Like,
Yeah.
could you imagine? Like, I would, yeah, absolutely, like, on every single level, vile.
And that's the other thing too, is like, I didn't even know, I mean, in like sort of American Christianity, they don't teach you about Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I didn't know, like, I didn't know, there's a whole sort of history. I wasn't a Zionist Christian. I wasn't, an evangelical Christian, but there is this sort of, there are more Zionist Christians than there are probably
Yeah.
Zionist
In the
Jewish
world, yeah.
people. And that's a whole, I really appreciated you went through on the decolonized Palestine website, because I do think, I'm not against Christianity. I'm not against, religions or anything like that, but I do encourage people who identify as Christian, or who like to read this, and to see, like, this is the belief that they have. Like, they want Armageddon. They're trying to trigger Armageddon. And I had no idea. It was like going to Palestine, especially Jerusalem or Al-Quds, in the holy city. It was like such a game changer for me in terms of, and I'll never forget, I'll never forget the not just the feeling that I had, but the sort of the way that, like, that whole, like, Al-Aqsa was like policed. Even our presence there was, and if there's, you can't really tell, but they're not even allowed to make repairs inside. And so you see these, postcard images of Al-Aqsa Mosque, but you go up close and it's falling apart, because they're not allowed to, like, actually maintain the site, because they want
And
to
they're tumbling underneath
destroy
it
it.
as well.
Yeah. So it's, sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, but I think
There's
it's,
so much
yeah,
to
it's
talk
so much to talk about. Yeah, I will, Habibti. It is. I understand. Like, it's made for consumption. Like, if you look at pictures of Jerusalem before 67, like, well, I mean, the eastern part of Jerusalem was occupied in 1967, the western part in 1948. But Israel basically treats it as reunited, and they annexed East Jerusalem, even though it's part of the West Bank, legally speaking. But I mean, international law is a joke, so let's just move on with the topic. But there have been neighborhoods that were destroyed. Streets are renamed to the names of prominent settlers, and it's not just in Jerusalem. If you like the entirety of Palestine, like we're talking about, over 500 villages were destroyed between 47 and the 50s. 500, and that would leave a lot of evidence behind it. So when you look at these, donate to plant a tree in Israel, guess where they're going? They're going on top of the ruins of those villages. Some of the biggest nature parks inside the 48 lines are actually the sites of Palestinian villages, and they're completely created to hide all of the atrocious war crimes. Even in the heart of Tel Aviv, like Yarkon Park, you can still see old Palestinian houses, and tourists walk around and, oh, look at those look at those old ruins of some kind of previous civilization or whatever. This was like inhabited 70 years ago. It's not even like, it's not ancient history. And I think this is another, misconception that people have. This is not ancient history. This is 100 years ago. This is very modern. The people that were kicked out in 47 and 48, a lot of them are still alive today. A lot of them still have their keys. There was paperwork at the time. A lot of them still have the documents of ownership of their lands, of their homes. So like, there's this is why a lot of people like think like, oh, it's just an ancient, conflict going around thousands of years. No, it is absolutely nonsense. And the whole consumption, like turning Jerusalem into almost a theme park. It's interesting you say that, because there are entire projects now in an area of Jerusalem called Silwad, where they want to destroy areas to build basically literally a biblical theme park. They call the City of David. And a lot of this archaeology is bogus. Like there's no like actual archaeological evidence, but even if there was, like, you don't destroy a neighborhood for archaeology or whatever. Like this is obscene. And like you said, Palestinians are not allowed to even repair their houses, and not just inside Al-Aqsa or in Jerusalem itself. Even in most areas of the West Bank, you're not allowed to build a new house. You're not allowed to fix your house. Even if you put a roof on like a destroyed house, you get fined and you have to destroy your home with your own hands, because they do not want any kind of expanded Palestinian presence anywhere. On the other hand, if you're a Jewish settler, you get all these benefits. You get these subsidies. You get these, easy loans to do whatever you want. You get this water subsidies if you want to be a farmer. There's so much you can go and do without even any kinds of permits, and you'll get de facto legalized within a few years anyway. And this is like one aspect of the legal way in which the Israeli state works. And our cat is also trying to get in on the conversation.
I want to add, I think it's very important how doubly alienating this is to Palestinian Christians. I have a Palestinian Christian friend who was just really honestly upset by whenever she went to the US or to the UK, they'd be like, oh, like, so you converted. There's a complete ignorance of Palestinian Christians who have literally been there since the time of Christ, and they're not the ones who converted, basically. And so it's very obviously upsetting to them to see the ways that Christian Zionism, the arguments that it makes, when, as we're seeing like right now in Gaza, one of the, like, a very small Christian community in Gaza have been under threat. Many have been killed. Churches being targeted. And of course, that was happening in the West Bank for quite some time. Zionist settlers are Jewish settlers are allowed to go and harass Palestinian Christians, especially in the Armenian quarter. And it's very antithetical to, actual Christian belonging to the land and, their feelings.
Yeah, and they're utilized quite cynically. Like when they need to, for example, like demonize the Palestinian Muslims, they say, oh, look how small the Palestinian Christian population is nowadays. They're all like immigrating. But when you have like Palestinian Christian community leaders like Mitri Rahib, who is a very high ranking priest who wrote multiple books on the topic, the biggest reason for the exodus of Palestinian Christians is that's just easier for them to immigrate than Palestinian Muslims. as a minority, as a Christian minority to Europe. And most of them immigrated due to the Israeli occupation. He wrote a whole book on this topic because it's a topic that's very worrying for Palestinian Christians as well. But this is swept under the rug. It's completely ignored when Palestinian Christians want to, because Palestinian Christians are Palestinians. They are like, we're not saying they have solidarity. They are Palestinians. Like, but people simply just think Palestinians are Muslims, and they use these words interchangeably, because for a lot of Israelis, they also use the word Jewish, Zionist, and Israeli interchangeably. They use the same logic, which is both also wrong in a different context. So it's just very cynical how Palestinian Christians are utilized only when they want to demonize other Palestinians, but when they're saying like, no, that's not what's happening, they're like ignored. And like you said, these evangelical Zionists, they want to see Armageddon happen. They don't actually care about Israel or the Jewish people or what have you. Like, they're anti-Semitic to the core. I mean, some of the biggest supporters of Zionism, like Lord Balfour, he was an anti-Semite. Churchill was a huge anti-Semite, but they supported Israel because it was, that was their interest in the region, to have an outpost in the region that was, sympathetic to the West. Has nothing to do, like, you're going to tell me like France, which was genociding 1 million Algerians, suddenly found, its conscience. I want to say like, you know what, let's do some kind of, helping the people that charity that we, massacred throughout history. And Palestinians are made to pay for, the whole crimes of Europe over the millennia.
Two small things. One, faith washing on the website, it delves into a lot of these arguments. I think there's some good links and research for people who are interested in more about this. And I flip sometimes to the other screen when I want to look up like book titles and such. And because there was this book that has just come out, it was Palestine, Migration and the Right of Return Before 1948. And I find it really fascinating because it talks a lot about those Palestinians who went to South America, who went to Chile, and were prevented from coming back, not from the Israeli state, but actually by the British mandate. So the numbers of how many Palestinian Christians are left have also been complicated by that, because it was a lot of Palestinian Christians who had business ties to South American nations.
Mm-hmm. So they left and they never allowed them to come back. Yeah. And we're talking today about Chile by itself has more than 300,000 Palestinians.
Wow. Yeah, it was, I went to, I believe it's Lida. Is that the correct pronunciation? And it was part of the Palestine Festival of Literature, or PalFest. And we were in like a tour bus, and we pulled in, and the tour guide came out, and he was like, he was really upset. And he's a Palestinian man, and he came out and he was like, can we just like leave the parking lot? And we're like, sure. And so we left the parking lot, and he said, this is the site of a mass grave, where the bus parked. And it's, it's just really upsetting that, there's no markers or anything like that. And so then, he takes us, on this kind of like walking tour of, I think they call it Lod now, or I'm not sure if that's the correct name.
In Arabic, we should pronounce it.
Yeah, Lid. I think in Hebrew it's Lod.
Lid.
Yeah.
Lod, yeah. So we were walking, and we get to this mosque that's all boarded up, and it was where there was a massacre during the Nakba and the so-called 1948 war, and it was just like a fascinating kind of experience. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because this was like, it was really like traumatizing for this man to constantly be like, to be reliving this history, but then also to be like, he's like really careful about what he's saying, because he's like, this is occupied territory, and just talking and narrating this history. And then we walked by this empty lot. There was no development. It was very strange. It was just a lot that was kind of empty, and there was a trash bin in the middle of the lot. And he said, oh, by the way, this is where George Habash was born, and this was his house. And they destroyed his house, and they just turned it into a dump. And it was just like, because the reason why I'm bringing this up is because George Habash was a Palestinian Christian. He was also a resistance fighter. And I was just sitting there thinking like, this isn't some sort of like accident. All of this is intentional, the creation and the recreation and the reconstruction of a landscape, right? And it's to the point where they want to destroy the memory of these people. And that to me, goes beyond just this sort of like, like there's this narrative that it's like, oh, the Middle East is always, the Middle East conflict. oh, they're always in conflict, right? And it's like, no, there's an intentional like creation. There's a, the uh, settler colonialism destroys to replace, right? That's the goal here. But also in the context of this destruction, there's a lot of resistance to this destruction. And in the United States, we're not even allowed, if we can talk about settler colonialism in the first place, we're definitely not allowed to talk about or to humanize people in resisting that process, because we have to create perfect victims, right? We can only talk about the 70% of people killed in Gaza as being children, women, and elderly, because the 30% is men, as if we have to like constantly narrate the destruction of life according to the logic of the state itself, and saying that, well, men are legitimate targets. But it's also this doesn't just happen within kind of the context of Israeli settler colonialism, but the way that it's narrated to people in the United States who are backing this is that men, specifically Arab men, Palestinian men, are aggressive. They don't have feelings. They're kind of guided by these emotional
Irrational
kind of
bloodlust.
responses. Exactly. And I was listening to the New York Times podcast this morning, and the New York Crimes is what it should be called. They interviewed this Palestinian doctor in Gaza, and they said that first one, he's narrating this awful, like, tragic scene, like he's talking about having to deliver babies out of Palestinian women who have been killed, and she says, well, what about the Hamas tunnels, and he's like, how dare you? He's like, I would rather, he's like, I'm a doctor. Like, what are you talking about? And he was like, how dare you? And then she goes, it sounds like you're very angry. And this is the constant dehumanization. And it might seem to the American listener, listening in Canada, the United States, whatever, or Europe, that this is somehow sort of a novel kind of like savagery, that men, they're aggressive, they have this bloodlust. But this is actually written in the founding document of the United States, which is the Declaration of Independence. It calls Native people merciless Indian savages. It projects the kind of savagery that it is committing onto the people it's destroying, because you have to dehumanize a people before you can, to justify the destruction of those people. And I just want to like shake people and say, like, this is something that this country actually created. It's in the founding document. It's projecting the kind of savage war that it is conducting against indigenous people, and then allying itself with another settler nation, the last settler colony, right? Hopefully, it's the last settler colony, against its own sort of savage population. And it's almost as if the figure of the Indian is in transit in terms of like becoming, the figure of the Palestinian. And I wanted to get your sort of thoughts on this, because part of the project that that what I found really amazing about decolonized Palestine is like it seems benign to us to humanize ourselves, but actually, like, we actually have to constantly do that, because in the face of this dehumanization.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I also think it's not just being transposed onto Palestinians, it's being transposed onto, quote unquote, enemies of the United States in general. If we look at what the Obama administration did when people started making ruckus about his drone strikes, killing too many innocents in Afghanistan, Yemen, Pakistan, because he was droning a lot in his during his years. What he didn't change the policies of the drone strikes. What he did is redefined what a combatant meant. And now every male that was 15 and over became a combatant. That way the civilian casualties went down, even though the actual people went up. That's redefining the problem. Every Afghani man over 15 years old is now considered a terrorist when they bomb their family, like, or their wedding. In Iraq, everything, like, this is the kind of, they redefined the problem, and because it's a PR issue for them, it's not anything else. So we definitely see how this is all, poured onto also Palestinians, and onto how we have to, like, children or doctors having to go out into the street with surrounded by corpses to say, hey, actually we were bombed, this is not propaganda. But like you've been saying, like, no matter what we do, resistance is the problem. Like, they will find a way to demonize you. Even when Palestinians did benign things like BDS, which is the boycott campaign, they were likened to Nazis at Kristallnacht, like trying to murder all the Jews and boycott them. Like, there's nothing that Palestinians can do to resist that will be acceptable. And I think trying to appease people who are invested in your disposition, who only have their power in society because of your disposition, that's not a winning strategy. And it's never how any, colonized person in the world has ever been liberated. And I think it's not even like a good sound tactical, decision.
Yeah, and we see decolonization as a disordering of these colonial processes and value systems and logics that are underpinning all of this. And we humanize ourselves by continuing to be human despite the inhumanity that's being committed against us, without also, I think, falling into the trap of thinking that there is some sort of respectable way to be accepted by these powers who are invested, ideologically and economically in your dehumanization. That's why it felt very intuitive to me to understand the way Black Americans' protests are, consistently painted with this brush of being just senseless and
riots. Like, even Martin Luther King, which everybody's now quoting as, the peaceful father of, everything. He was called a rabble rouser, a violent riot, instigators. There's never liberation movements or movements for change are never popular in their time. That's how they're actually affecting the status quo, because they're not popular. It's easy after 20 years to say, oh, I was with Mandela, for example, but at the time, the United States was vetoing any kind of actual change towards what's going on in South Africa. And another thing that I want to emphasize about what you were saying is that a lot of these accusations are actually projections of the violence that's been doing. Like, when they say Palestinians want to throw all the Jews in the sea, the only pictures that exist of people being thrown in the sea are Palestinians in Gaza being actually ethnically cleansed from their villages because there was no way to go other than the sea, or pushed into buses, like literal buses, and shoved onto and dunked onto the border of Jordan and Lebanon. This is something that actually happens. There were stories about Hamas fighters disemboweling a pregnant woman and mutilating the baby. This is actually a testimony from the Deir Yassin massacres and Sabra and Shatila. Like, these are literal testimonies of Palestinians that were simply flipped upside down and turned into to be wielded against Palestinians. It's like, and now obviously when push comes to shove, suddenly there's no way to verify any story of rape, any story of 40 beheaded children, any story of all these things that people have been accusing Palestinians of. But it doesn't matter, because by the time any of this debunking comes out, it's already close. The narrative has been built.
Yeah, and it's to go back to even this being in the Constitution, literally the founding of the United States, like the Native American, the savages. It's also strikes me as, like, once again, American Manifest Destiny was supposed to be the good violence because it was violence for this great, amazing cause. It makes me think of the Israeli army. We wrote about that in the Purity of Arms. Like, oh, they're forcing us to kill them. It is so unfortunate that you're making us, such noble, high-minded people, do this. You're forcing our hand. It shows that it's not. Obviously, these institutions are not pacifist to be coming and arguing to Palestinians about where's your Gandhi and why aren't you nonviolent. It's like, they're violent. They are violent, but it's just that they see their violence as correct and our violence.
And there's no Israeli Gandhi. there's never the same impulse to be like, why can't you settle nonviolently?
They're supposed to make peace with the 2.5 Israeli leftists holding a sign somewhere, as if this moment isn't a bit more urgent. I'm sorry, but it's a lot more urgent than you holding a sign in front of whatever.
Yeah, and like, ask Netanyahu those questions. Ask why like, that's, I just get frustrated when I'm listening to these. I have to watch this because it's like, it's my job.
I can imagine. Yeah, frustrating.
But it's like ask that of the questions you ask of Palestinians are not the same and it's like, you can't even point it out to these people because it's so, I don't want to essentialize, like, Westerners, but it's like, it almost is like this natural dehumanization of Palestinians, but also, as you pointed out too, is of the people throughout the world. It's like these are, aggressive religions, these are aggressive, cultures, these are barbaric cultures. And I almost get a little bit, even on, the progressive side, I get a little offended when they say, oh, well, this is, they're going back to 19th century tactics of war. It's like, no, this is like settler colonialism didn't stop. This is a modern kind of phenomenon. This is modernity. This is Western modernity. This isn't a barbaric past that, a repressed sort of violence in Western culture that somehow existed in the past and that it overcame. And then, Israel's an outlier. It's like, no, this is what the system has been about. Like, if you even look at the last, war on terror, millions have been killed in the name of what? U.S. security, U.S. hegemony. Like, I don't even. It almost becomes there. I mean, there's obviously a reason. There's a materialist analysis. There's political economy that's happening, and there's interests that are involved. But it almost becomes as if it's like it obscures the sort of the I guess the intent behind it, and it almost just looks like pure chaos. And I want to ask, because I saw this earlier, and I didn't get too far into the decolonized Palestine website to sort of come to any sort of significant conclusions, but I wanted to ask about the olive trees and the olive groves and that have been destroyed. And I was doing a little bit of research, and I noticed, I read that somewhere like olive trees can live to be hundreds of years
Well,
old.
thousands in some places. Yeah, they're Roman olive trees, like from the Roman Empire. So basically 0 AD. How can you burn that down as a person who calls themselves indigenous? How could you justify, making warfare against the land itself to punish people living there?
But the kind of ideology behind it, the way I see it, is like how they've destroyed the bison or the buffalo in North America, and they call it wild. And it's like we managed ranges. This is like an open range animal. It was like almost domesticated because they relied on us for, like, burning the grass and making sure that their herds were, safe, and all these things. And they destroyed it to destroy us, right? But then it's the same sort of like projection onto the like olive groves, as if they're just a wild feature of the natural landscape that can be destroyed and tamed. And I wanted to ask you, like, what your thoughts on those comparisons are, because settler colonialism isn't just about taking land, it's also about destroying like the modes of production that sustain native life.
I honestly think that's an excellent comparison. What Israelis, like settlers in the West Bank, do, they burn down olive groves because those are the sources of, livelihood for Palestinian villagers. And they think that if they burn them all down, Palestinians will need to leave because, it takes years upon years for an olive tree to start producing. And once it starts producing, it still doesn't produce much. It needs like a decade or so to be like in full swing, because we don't, our methods of agriculture are still very, traditional, and from grandfather teaches his son basically, and his son teaches his child. And we have olive groves that are like hundreds upon hundreds of years old. So burning these down, I don't understand how anybody who like views themselves as, oh, this land belongs to me, how they could justify burning it down and turning it into ash, basically. And we see that also with water sources when they take them over. We see it also now. There's this new thing called settler shepherds, which basically a settler has like a small flock of goats, and they go to Palestinian land and say, this is now my grazing land, you can't go there. These kinds of like this pastoral colonialism, almost like it's kind of mimicking the Palestinian style of husbandry and subsistence agriculture, and just flipping it on its head. Because on the other side of the coin, you have a soldier who would shoot you if you actually contest this. But if a Palestinian does that, like if an Israeli does that, there's anybody can contest that in a way that can protect themselves.
And I think it also just speaks to this lens through which they see the land, that is very commodifying, that is very disrespectful,
Disneyland.
that is which is why when Wolf said that like settler colonialism, it's the foundation that underpins modernity, because it's these kind of like modern ideas of this stuff is like backwards and quaint is I think part of it too, like the Palestinians going and harvesting olives, and not just olive trees, because it just makes me think we brought this up in greenwashing, but the fact that they chose to plant trees that would normally thrive in Europe, but they just wanted to put it here. They wanted to be reminded of these European forests, and they do all these things. And that's what they planted so on top of so many of these demolished villages. And as we saw that these trees were just not meant to be here because they're catching on fire, and all these wildfires can be traced back to that. And I feel confident saying that takes place in the U.S. as well. There has been a complete disrespect of indigenous knowledge of ecology and the balance of these environmental forces and things that make you see these kind of horrific wildfires. Same for the Australian wildfires. And then, when the US, I just think of how it's particularly horrible is that they cause these wildfires, and then it's like, let's take out our incarcerated to go fight these fires for pennies on the hour. It's I don't even know if dystopian is the word, but that is I think the logical, inevitable end conclusion of these values engendered by capitalism.
Yeah, because they come here in the middle, of the Middle East, and they want to have a European lifestyle. They want to have a European level of life, and they want to be reminded of the hills of Switzerland. They don't want to be reminded of the actual native fauna and flora that are in the area. So, like you said, they grow all of these trees, and they drain some of the swamps, which apparently Hola swamp was drained. In their propaganda, they say, "Oh, look, we fixed swampland. It was full of mosquitoes, but ecologically, it was a massacre. So many bird and animal types became extinct in that area because it was a whole ecosystem. Swamps are not a bad thing." So slowly over the years, they started reflooding the area because they knew that was the only way to actually bring back some of these animals. But in their propaganda, they're like, "Oh, look, we fixed the swamps." The Dead Sea, for example, has been shrinking every year for the last, decades. The Dead Sea is almost gone now because they keep taking all this water, take all the salt from it, and sell it as beauty products. There's no respect for any of the geographic areas of the land or the water or the seas, and it's just made for exploitation, made for profit, made for production.
Just the overconsumption, the fact that it's always striking to me to see how many swimming pools are built specifically because they're denying Palestinians enough, even just the WHO recommended minimum amount of water you're supposed to drink every day to be healthy. Before this recent assault on Gaza, they weren't reaching that minimum recommended amount of water. Actually was the case in the West Bank too. And while they have these water parks and swimming pools.
Yeah, I mean, there are 5,000 settlers in the Jordan Valley that use as much water as 1 million Palestinians. They're like farmers. So they take all the water, and it's all subsidized by the government. And they have these vast, date and other kinds of plantations. And they use as much water as the whole 1 million Palestinians in the West Bank. I mean, there's around more than one right now, but they use more than 1 million water than 1 million Palestinians for consumption.
And in Hebron, we saw that they were physically actually closing up a water source with cement. So
yeah, because there's no permit. Because that's they always say there's no permit. That's their justification.
Well, I'm trying to get a permit.
It's impossible. It's over 99% rejection rate. Nobody gets a permit. So then when you go online and they say, "Oh, well, it was destroyed because there was no permit," it's not racist. It's not as if the legal system exists in a vacuum, as if it's not created to ease the occupation and colonization of the West Bank. And what a lot of people don't even seem to understand is that this is military law. It's not even a kind of civil law. This is in the West Bank. There's a military law. If I get arrested by the Israelis, I go to a military court, even though I'm a civilian, and this is a contravention to international law, and I'm put in a jail inside of 48, even though that's a Geneva Convention breach. This is the daily life of Palestinians, and Palestinians are supposed to accept that as normal. I mean, this year alone, before October 7th,
and there's a 98% conviction rate too in these.
Yeah. There's no way you can. There's no matter what you're being accused of, you're going to go to jail because you're in a military court, and an officer is basically. In a lot of cases, you're not even given that privilege, of getting a judge. In other cases, it's called administrative detention, where you're put in jail for 6 months without any kind of evidence or not even knowing what you're being charged with. And this can be renewed indefinitely. So there are people who spent more than a decade in jail without even having any kind of due process or even knowing why they're in jail. Like, this is the kind of normalcy. I think there are around 1,000 or 2,000 people nowadays who are in administrative detention. And this is just the normal for Palestinians. Like, before October 7th, nearly 300 Palestinians were killed, but nobody was up in arms about it because this is normal. This is the cost for this, for the sustaining of this Zionist state. And this is normal. This is normal. This is what Palestinians have been going through every single year for the last 80 years or so. So when Palestinians finally choose to break out of their, ghetto, concentration camp, whatever, then suddenly the world has a problem, with violence, and they start talking about pacifism and how violence is never the option, but the violence of the system is never brought up. It's normalized, and it's not, interesting unless Israelis are the ones who are actually being damaged. Then suddenly the world remembers that there's a thing called international law and, warfare laws and such.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about. Well, there's a lot to talk about. I kind of have two final questions. One is sort of about international law and how this is constantly invoked as if it's going to change anything. And I'm not trying to be cynical, because law itself doesn't sit above society. It is a articulation of the values of society and those who rule those societies, or societies, I should say. But one of the, and you brought this up earlier, Rawan, is about boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and the sort of cultural delegitimization of the cultural, moral, social, political delegitimization of the Zionist project is perhaps one of the more kind of profound, I would say, ways that a lot of activists outside of Palestine can participate. Because, in the context of the United States or Canada, there have been attempts to do land acknowledgements, right? And the settler sits in a relative, in relative comfort while saying, yeah, I stole the land, absolve me of my sins, or I apologize, I'm sorry, as Justin Trudeau often says, because there's no radical socio-economic transformation of power. There's no, political transformation of power. There's no overturning of the colonial order. But when we see, as we read, and as Stephen Salida points out in his book Internationalism, the BDS campaign, even if it doesn't successfully boycott or cause economic damage to these institutions and these industries that are invested in profiting from the occupation, the reaction by the lobby, the reaction by the state of Israel, and calling these things, what you said earlier, it's I think Fathi said this
terrorism.
was yeah, exactly. But it's but it shows that it's that has socioeconomic impact, because it's in such a precarious and weak position, in terms of its moral legitimacy, because it has to constantly lie to the world. It has to get President Biden to literally repeat lies, and even his own staff is calling him a liar. I don't know if you read today, there was a letter that came out. They're even calling him a liar.
I'm actually gonna read this.
I'll have to send it to you. It's kind of funny. They I think it was 2,000, or I don't know, several hundred people in the Department of State, basically staffers, wrote and called that, said that President President Biden was repeating Zionist propaganda. I mean, they didn't say Zionist propaganda, but was repeating lies that the IDF was telling. But anyways, the point is that and I have a question about this, because how is it that people in places like North America, Indigenous people, can actually be in solidarity? I was actually asked this by some friends I met in Ramallah. They were like, what do American Indians he's like, you guys are powerless in the United States. What do you actually have to offer Palestinian liberation? And he wasn't being
take the effort to go these sort of let's say, more legitimate or accepted channels. Like, even though, BDS is obviously very criminalized in the US and all these terrible comparisons were made, compared to armed resistance, it's obviously seen as more of a thing you can do out in the open. I think something valuable there is, I honestly think it kind of radicalizes. Like, it showed, like, when we compile all these contraventions or all these breaches of international law, uh, it's not because we think the ICC are about to swoop in tomorrow, but it is just, I think it's important. I think it's important, especially for people who are kind of new to this solidarity work, to see it's like, no, it's very blatant. And there's got to be a reason why Russia was sanctioned with such ease, where we were in all seriousness talking about boycotting Russian dogs or Russian whatever, anything that said anything about Russia. But when it came to Israel, all of a sudden, this was pushed back against.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. So I find that interesting. I think Salaita's point about showing their weakness and their reaction to that is part of my thoughts on that as well. In that, again, shows their illegitimacy. I think that in and of itself is radicalizing. But about the point of what to have to offer, I definitely push back against ideas of solidarity being transactional in these ways. It's not, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. I think this moral claim that you're saying, this pushback against American colonialism, this rejection of the idea that it's over, or that outnumbering us, or your violence that pushed us into these reservations, the pushback against that being moral or acceptable or completed, I think is instructive to us. I think it shows us why, like, besides the imperialist interests, is the foundation of American exceptionalism and of Zionism that I personally, again, find useful. And I think any work that's done there for land back and for this push for autonomy and for this push to over and over again, claim that our language and our cultures are beautiful and worth protecting, it is inspiring, and I think it's meaningful.
Yeah, and honestly, like, if you look at the streets, like, every person on the street matters. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you see the pro-Israel protests, they're barely managing to scrape by a few hundred people at tops. London the other day had 800,000 all marching in the street. The streets belong to the people, and the people are supportive of Palestine. Doesn't matter what happens, like going out, making a sound, even like a little bumper sticker, on your car, to make Palestinians feel like they're not alone, to make, Zionists also feel like, hey, there's a political backlash against what I support, this evil that I support. Like, it's not scot-free. Any small thing like that really matters. Even waving a flag in a house, like on a windowsill of a house, like putting up our flag. Like, these things mean a lot to Palestinians. I understand not everybody can go out and take radical action like Pal Legal or other groups who or shutting down, like Pal Action, like shutting down the Elbit factory in the UK, and now there are plans to do the same in the United States. Not everybody could do that. It's very obvious. Not everybody has access to all these products that they can be choosy about boycotting, like in food deserts, for example. But at the very least, we can't kowtow down to the narrative that Palestinians are human. Like, just making a ruckus, it's the weakest attempt that could be made. It's just anything that makes Palestinians feel like they're not alone. Like, no matter how small you think it is, there's some Palestinians somewhere on the street, anywhere else, that will see it, and they will be very grateful for any of the smallest little gestures, if you even can't do one of the bigger ones.
And even just threatening this, the presence of Indigenous people, and as we see, like, these departments of Indigenous studies, like that in of itself, like, threatens the entire sort of philosophical basis of the U.S., and it helps us imagine a better world where it's that they're not allowed to win, if you will, if we want to put it in kind of like more simplistic terms.
Yeah, and I think we should be wary of these, like you said, like these symbolic kind of gestures about, oh, this is a land acknowledgement. Or they were talking about, for example, putting Harriet Tubman on the dollar, so on that $20 bill or something, or I don't remember which dollar bill. They was talking about that a few years ago. Like this kind of, trying to appease people with like symbolic gestures without actually solving any of the issues. Like this is not actually how universities actually change anything on the ground. Like you have endowments worth billions in some cases, like the Ivies. Like you actually have power to do things, and just having like something empty like that instead of actually, what, don't even help. Just stop repressing and censoring Palestinian students, or censoring Palestinians who are trying to, pro-Palestinians who are trying to say anything. We have so much policing of Palestinian language going on lately. Like literally, Palestinians have thousands of Palestinians dead, thousands of children, Palestinian babies dying in incubators. Literally, the lie that helped, legitimize the invasion of Iraq. That's happening in real life, and we have photographic evidence. And what are people doing? They're dissecting Palestinian language so that it's not like uncomfortable for them, or like, what do you mean behind this word? And for people who are invested in your disposition, even saying hello is a threat of genocide, because because they want to see the threat of genocide in it. From the river to the sea is suddenly a call to genocide. Palestinian BDS is Nazi-like tactics. Going to the ICC is, terrorism. Like this is it's never going to work if we want to try to appease everybody, because some people are actually against you. You can't win them over, no matter how meekly and how politely you talk to them. Sometimes you have to go and boycott them. Sometimes you have to go and just like cuss them out. It happens.
And then because I was reminded of also what you brought up in the book of this pushback against the American Indian Studies Department in Oklahoma State University against the mascot, the Chiefs, and how there was a lot of frustration, or there was pushback because it was seen as like, no, this is a part of our culture. And it's like, well, true, yeah, it is a part of American culture to come and displace the indigenous people and to commit these horrible crimes, and then to create these kind of like offensive caricature stereotypes to make it this swallowable story. I think even things like that, like any kind of pushback, even if it seems like on that level, any kind of pushback against this American hegemony, against these ideas, this whitewashing of the past, is, I think, a win for all indigenous peoples. I wanted to show this because I should have worn these. I forgot. But there was this Etsy shop called Beads Against Fascism, and what I loved is just how she took the time to practice this craft. And I know this.
For people who can't see, who are listening, they're beaded Palestinian flag earrings, made by Beads Against Fascism, who does some really rad art. Yeah,
yeah,
very cool.
Which I love because, again, obviously the Zionist Project is doing this with Palestinian art forms, where Bedouin women were tricked into creating these embroidered tatris it's called, these embroidered pieces, and they were not told that an Israeli fashion designer was going to put it in New York Fashion Week and present it as completely outside of its historical context. Even one of the Zionist militia members during the Nakba, the homes that they raided, one of them had like a traditional embroidered Palestinian dress, a thobe, and he took it, and he just kind of kept it around as like a war trophy, frankly. And so these things, when I look at how Native Americans fight back against cultural appropriations and these minimizations, I think they're valuable lessons for us there.
Yeah, and I think the liberation of all the different nations, indigenous nations everywhere, like it's going to have a spillover effect worldwide. Like even like we always say this, when marginalized peoples become free themselves and they become stronger themselves, it's going to have a spillover and a domino effect all over the world. We say this to our comrades from the from Black Lives Matter. We said this to our comrades from all these different kinds of delegations that come to Palestine to see it. So strong and free nations will also like have a spillover effect and will inevitably challenge the same system that holds us both in oppression.
Yeah, one of the things like with the sports mascots, it's not like it's just a sports mascot, right? The federally funded institutions of the United States held more than a million bodies of our ancestors that were they either killed or that they dug up to study. That doesn't even include the private collections. To this day, the patriots that they hung for the 1862 uprising, there's 38 of them, all of their bodies haven't been recovered. And in fact, medical doctors kept trophies, kept literal skin patches from our warriors as trophies, like to this day. Like there are still private collections. The Skull and Bones Society stole Geronimo's skull at Yale University, and they use it in their rituals. So this is a body snatcher society. It's not like just a symbolic sort of like dehumanization. It's a literal dehumanization. When they ask us, much in the same way, oh, why weren't there people buried here? It's because you robbed the graves. You literally robbed the graves. I don't possess my family's cultural patrimony from 100 years back because you stole it. You destroyed it and you stole it. And so it's not just this, like when people even talk about, well, if there was a genocide, where are all the bodies? And it's like, you literally stole most of them, a good portion of them. But also, to kind of think about this in terms of, this other aspect of like a demographic war. It's like oftentimes like Native people are saying, oh, well, you're not really a significant, portion of the population. It's like the fact that we are a portion of the population is a testament to our resistance, and the fact that, we still have a presence and that we still, like they're still passing laws to criminalize being a water protector. They're like, I think it was like 38 states have passed anti-protest bills specifically targeting Native. It's like, if we're not a problem, if we're not a threat, then why do you constantly have to make our existence illegal? And so this, it shows that, like, even beyond the kind of vacuousness of land acknowledgements, of apologies, of all these things, that there is still a significant threat. And even the question of land back, they will say, much like they respond to from the river to the sea, in their genocidal minds, there is only one solution, when there's a decolonization, which means they are going to do to us what we did to them, which is absolute projection. Like fundamentally, it's the silliest thing. It's like, that's what's, in your brain. Like your enlightened thinking is like literally an end game scenario where there's only a zero sum, solution to everything, which is genocide. That says more about you than it says about us, and thinking about like even when they were calling up the reserves for the IDF or the occupation forces, they were coming from overseas. And I was just like laughing because I was like, imagine, we called up the United States called up all of their reserves and everyone came from overseas. People would be like, wait, why are people coming from overseas? I don't understand this. And it's like, it's because I don't want to, like, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. Israel's not even livable for Israelis. Like, they don't even want to live there. Like, and they have.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we talked about. And the moment the proverbial shit hit the fan, that the airports filled up instantaneously. Like when you see the difference in the way Palestinians and Israelis have been reacting to the latest war, even the people who have lost their entire families, we're talking like sometimes 40 or 50 people, they say if this brings us 1 inch closer to liberation, then it's worth it. Israelis are out protesting their government because they don't want to lose their standard of living. They want to go out and they want to live their life. And those who are able to flee have already fled. And all of them are saying, well, we're not going to go back and live near the communities near Gaza. And now we're not going to go live near the communities in the north where Hezbollah is currently operating. It's like there's this completely different kind of approach to the land and their steadfastness in the land. Like it's very like stark difference because one of them has like this first world level of living, obviously at our expense, and they want to maintain that. If that's threatened, they will just simply move away. That's why a lot of white South Africans converted to Judaism and moved to Israel after apartheid fell. And there's huge like articles about it. It's like almost too on the nose. So it's that kind of same, detachment or like different understanding of the land than Palestinians deal with.
Yeah, this also just calls back, as many people have been pointing out, a lot of the white South Africans, the Afrikaners, preferred to leave once they were no longer the beneficiaries of this like overt racist system. Even though, frankly, like Truth and Reconciliation didn't even go far enough in terms of addressing the root issues there. A lot of them, came to Israel or just left. And so we are definitely going to see that here. There are many people who only want to stay here to be those. Sorry?
A lot of them went to Alberta, Canada as well. They went to go work in the oil fields. There's a whole study on that as well. But
Yeah, so it's them not wanting to live in a society in which they are equal to us. It's not, a reverse genocide. It's them not wanting to live in that kind of society. It's our rejection of that kind of supremacy system is obviously moral and just and needed in order to have that kind of better world. Uh, I feel like there was something else I was gonna say. Hmm. Oh, yeah, it's what was interesting was there were some Palestinians in Gaza who were like, American soldiers are on the ground with the Israeli soldiers because look, they have an American flag patch. And some people had to be like, well, who knows? Like, it might just be, they don't see it as contradictory to put both flags. They could an Israeli reservist who was born and raised in the U.S. and now they're here. And they're putting that flag, like signaling those sort of like that affinity there. Definitely very much instrumental. And I think, what we're saying about, Israelis not wanting to live there and how many have the dual passports. A lot of them just want to have that idea of, oh, we need to be from somewhere. Why does everybody get to be from somewhere and not the Jews, ignoring that there are many, many more, ethnic and racial groups that don't have a nation state in their name than those that are. So obviously, part of it is just us rejecting that kind of reactionary view of how to politically organize the world.
And
Uh,
there's like 100,000 settlers from American origins, like U.S. origins in the West Bank alone. And they come really to play out their pioneer fantasies and cowboy fantasies of taking over land and being able to shoot anybody and just not and get away with anything they want. It's an experience, like you said, it's for consumption, it's for Disneyland. And these are the first people who are on the planes as soon as things get bad.
and it's just the issues with the contradiction of Israel needing to both present itself as the only place in the world where Jews can be truly safe, while also needing to have, a conscription system and to constantly be a threat. And look at us, we are tiny and we are surrounded by all the like angry Muslim hordes. There's a contradiction there, and it can't be resolved. Neither can the contradiction between, again, wanting to be this first world nation and to feel like you are the leaders of civilization and a light unto the world, just like the American settlers see themselves, and again needing to consistently engage in these sort of crimes, and even before Gaza. Harass people in the West Bank and checkpoints and sniper shootings of teenagers and all the rest of it. Like it can't be resolved without resolving the original impetus behind all this.
Yeah, it's just a ridiculous argument altogether to think that Jewish people can never be safe unless they have their state. Like it's as if they just wrote off like every country in the world as like about to commit, the Holocaust 2.0 if there's no Israel. It's absolutely like a ridiculous argument. And a lot of these people treat Israel as like a backup country that they can go on vacation in, and they're like attached to, like they go play this whole, Disneyland, like you said, atmosphere. Like they go for birthright, they go, they, sleep with half the people there. No, yeah. And no, they go meet these like Arab Bedouins in the south, and they like wear this like thobe and stuff, and they go play around in it, and like oh look how like we can talk to Arabs in Israel, like look there's no apartheid here and stuff. Like it's just like a very horrible curated kind of propaganda tour. Also similarly, South Africa had something very similar to this, but like the parallels right themselves almost. But it's just like horrible. Like we reject the idea that a Jewish person in New York should not feel safe and have to move halfway across the globe to be able to feel safe. And again, like Rawan said, they also have to play with this bunker mentality that we're always under threat to be able to justify all these kinds of draconian and horrible measures and horrible expansionist and colonial, laws and policies that they have. So it's kind of a balancing game.
And I would also even go further to say that not only is it not what keeps Jewish people safe, I would actually argue that Zionism increases anti-Semitism in the world, because you're over here telling people that it is a core Jewish value and publicly saying that you are going to excommunicate Jews who disagree if they don't want to see hospitals be bombed and children on incubators be killed. That's, of course, when you are conflating these terrible, like this terrible thing with the people's view of Jewish people, even you're putting it even in the minds of someone who has never even physically met a Jewish person. I would argue that that is a huge part of keeping Jewish people unsafe, because you're basically telling everyone that you can all be targets.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah. Obviously, that's not the root cause of anti-Semitism around the world. Like, nobody's denying that. But for people, like a lot of people who don't understand, they're like, well, I mean,
I think it fans the flames.
It fans the flames because they themselves keep conflating Judaism and Zionism. But when it's also like it fits their argument, they also say, well, you can't conflate Judaism and Israeli and Zionism. But it depends on the argument that's being made. Like sometimes, like just I don't know, like they use all these cultural centers in the West to spread, IDF propaganda and such. And when anybody, protests there, they're like, oh, well, why are you going to a Jewish institution to protest? Well, they're not protesting because it's Jewish. They're protesting because it has Israeli propaganda and they have an IDF soldier going to speak. But on the other hand, like when you don't make this conflation, they also get like offended. Like, why are like this is the Jewish homeland? Like, how do you mean Israel and Judaism are not synonymous? Like it's a very dishonest and very cynical way to kind of weaponize the historical suffering of the Jewish people to be able to support this, current ethno-nationalist project that was at the time very unpopular, even with the Jewish population worldwide.
Yeah, and I read that Jerusalem Post article by the editor. I can't remember his name, but he was like the art, the essay I never wanted to write or something like that. And that means like we need to excommunicate anti-Zionist Jews from Judaism. And one of the like he like it was like mask off kind of thing where he was criticizing. This is not. I'll have to find it for you. He was criticizing. He said basically he was quoting this guy who said Russian Jewish Soviets betrayed Judaism because they advocated for a secular state. And I was like, holy crap. So this is like anti-communist. Like you're literally like you're putting it out there. Like there is no alternative but this like ethno-nationalist state. Like that's literally the only alternative. And if you're against it, you're out. And then also just like red baiting like people on the left is saying, oh, you want a secular state? Well, you're betraying like, oh, all these Russian Jewish people are actually, they betrayed Judaism. And it's like, actually, historically, that doesn't even make any sense. Cause like, even given like the Soviet Union's like recognition of the state of Israel, it's like, anyway, that's a whole nother topic, but
but it's not the view by himself. Like, it's not the view of this person by itself. The Israeli High Court actually agrees because in Israel, they distinguish between citizenship and nationality. Your nationality is your ethnicity and your citizenship is just Israeli. But you cannot change like your ID card to say just Israeli. You have to have your ethnic group on it. And if you say, no, I just want to be Israeli, the High Court said, well, that would undermine the Jewish character of the state. So like if you're a secular, too bad. Like it doesn't matter. You have to be Jewish on your ID card. And by the way, a lot of your rights come from your nationality, not from your citizenship. So that's the technical way how they allow, everybody's an equal citizen, but then they have a tiered society based on national rights.
And very blatant segregation.
Yeah, when you were talking earlier too about like how it's always this kind of threat, like there's always a constant threat, right? And this is like literally it's just a Western movie. I don't know if you ever watch Western movies where it's like the invaders are constantly surrounded by the natives, right? But in reality, it's like it makes invasion look like self-defense because you're saying, oh, we're trying to protect the sanctity of our incursions into these territories because we're constantly surrounded by these barbarous hordes who cannot be negotiated with and they have to be destroyed. So it's like literally Israel's just a really bad genocidal Western movie at the end of the day, where they want to.
That's great framing, actually.
They want to be John Wayne.
That's where you start your story. Depends where you start. If you start your story like Murid Marghuti, if you start your story with the arrows of the natives, then the settler is the victim.
Exactly. Yeah, and they'll always perpetually be the victim, because that's going back to the Constitution. That was the justification. The merciless Indian savages on our frontier who do not distinguish between race or sex, right, or age or sex or something like that, where it's like they indiscriminately kill all settlers, right? There's no their warfares. It's the same sort of projection, or even thinking about how the United States has framed itself as a victim nation from the beginning. Oh, we were persecuted in Europe, so we had to come here. It's like that the original sin came from Europe, and we had to come here, and now we're being persecuted by the natives, or the people we've enslaved are now killing us and rising up against us, and they're the savages as well, because that's also a point in the Declaration of Independence. They call it domestic insurrections, which is slave revolts. So right off the bat, they're claiming this kind of victimhood narrative. But I want to end with a different kind of question and a different kind of framing. And I was introduced to the work, or I guess the life and legacy of Basil al-Araj when I was in Palestine. And some of people, I didn't hear about this. Wasn't like up on Palestinian resistance or the movements that were happening. But one thing I was that a lot of the people I was talking with were saying is that Basil talked about first we have to decolonize or liberate our minds, right? We have to destroy the walls in our minds first before you can even think about decolonizing or liberating the landscape. And something that I remember at the time happening, but for some reason it's only coming back to me now. Like its meaning, is coming back to me now, and really sinking in, and thinking about, as somebody who has been active in the struggle for a long time, it was always about like, how many people can we get out on the streets, and how many people can we organize, but always thinking about like liberating the land, but then always like also like not really paying attention to that kind of the mental exercises, because we are colonized, our minds are colonized, like we are limited in what we can think is possible. And October 7th like showed the destruction of a prison wall, and showed that like people are not colonized in their minds and like literally believe in the impossible, or what was preached to them or told to them what was the impossible. And for me, that's how it had like it's radically transformed the way I've been thinking about things, and like how an understanding like why consciousness is so important, why raising consciousness, and why something like a website like Decolonized Palestine actually shows what is possible. And can both of you speak about what, I mean, this is a big topic, but what that decolonization might look like in terms of a liberated Palestine, and why it's important to begin with educating our minds and thinking about that these things aren't permanent, that they aren't immovable objects.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, a lot of this conversation happening now with people out in the streets in the U.S., even in places we haven't necessarily seen them before, there seems to be a lot of panic amongst like the political class, and especially the Democratic Party, because Biden is doing terrible. And I don't think they realize that attempting to browbeat people into accepting less and less, and within the confines of just go out and vote and just convince people and take these sort of like legitimate, accepted, respectable processes. I think it's being rejected. I think it should be rejected. We can and will do better than electing between two people that is for Palestinians, for a lot of the people impacted by American imperialism. They're the same. Trump and Biden are the same. Now, you can't argue that there is a difference. To me, that speaks to pushing people's energy away from that system is, I think, part of expanding our imaginations. Something I think about too is I think a lot. Salaita was saying how Palestinians in the U.S. or those who are like the non-natives in the U.S. we also have a moral obligation to fight back against American colonialism. Like I think about, Palestinian Americans in the US, it's to see that the way that these are interconnected, push back against that and think about it more in terms of vote counts or in terms of kind of these other things. Yeah, just and this can encourage people to take more necessary strategic action and to treat the moment with the urgency that it deserves.
Yeah, I think Bassel Araj, one of his big points that he used to emphasize a lot was that there's a lot of things that we have normalized that we should never view as normal. There are things that have been imposed on us and have we come to expect after 100 years that are not natural and should not be tolerated. And he died basically in a firefight with the occupation soldiers. He was called the engaged intellectual because he wrote and he also had a weapon and was actually like engaged in armed struggle against his occupiers.
Very well read, and that was the answer that he found when he says, "I have found my answer."
Yeah, and the thing is, like, if you want to take like if you want to take this like boring, let's say realpolitik view of the world that you try to measure our powers and asymmetry, there's no single liberation movement in the world that could have possibly won if you would have followed that account. Who would have thought that, tribes in the mountains of Algeria could have beat the French Empire, or that, like, the Viet Cong were able to, defeat the napalm and the helicopters of the Americans. Because if you try to look at this from a point of view of, balance of power, it's difficult to imagine this force winning. But there are a lot of other, aspects that need to be kept in mind. There's this like the ideology. This is their homeland, defending it. They have the future of their children to fight for. Like a lot of Palestinian songs emphasize that I'm carrying my rifle today so that my child could carry a sickle. Like we want to go back to our, agricultural and pastoral lives. Like this is not like something that is not part of us, but this is something that's forced on us. And Palestinian political slogans used to say "Tahrir al-Insan wal-Ard," which is to liberate the people and the land. So these are two different things, because to be able to liberate the land, we need to liberate the people too. And part of this liberation is kind of tearing down this normalcy of colonialism and occupation and all these things that we take for granted that are not actually a part of nature. Like even things today, like the whole concept of a nation state was barely invented 200 years ago, less than 200 years ago. Things that seem like they're ancient are actually very modern inventions that seem like they're kind of, a part of history. Even the power of kings, which seemed like nothing would ever, challenge that for thousands of years, now is obscure. So I don't think that like the future is a blank check. That hasn't been written yet. Like the future is full of possibilities, and being able to dream of those possibilities, that is the first and crucial step to be able to act upon that. And I think October 7th really opened the gates to our imaginations, because who could have thought 20 years ago only that the inmates of the Gaza ghetto were able to break through. And 70% of these people are refugees, so they were actually going back to the communities that they were expelled from. Like the villages, like the Israeli settlements outside of Gaza, are built on the ruins of the villages of these people. But you thought that you could live on the ruins. You thought you could live at their expense forever. But no, they are coming back, and you can never, ever be safe as long as you're doing what you're doing and living at our expense. And this is not only legal and moral and just, but this is how things will go.
And I think, for us on our end, in terms of when we talk about like this respectability politics and things, for so many of us seeing that, Palestinian-driven bulldozer take down the walls of the Gaza concentration camp, it really showed us that we can see an end to the Oslo political project and an end to these attempts to keep shoehorning the Palestinian liberation within the confines of crumbs and the Bantustans they'll maybe let us have in between their settlements while they still have control over all the land and resources, and accepting more than just not just we want Palestine to be free. We want to be able to go from river to sea freely, not through checkpoints, not under gunpoint, not through all these things. We want that, and not just, my passport saying Palestine on it, or these kind of other symbolic things, really truly the symbolic victories of Oslo.
Yeah, that's all of that is really powerful. And for just from our perspective, I'm not speaking like on behalf of everyone who lives here, but I remember in DC, I didn't go to the DC action, the big, pro-Palestine rally, solidarity rally there, but like all tendencies of the left were there, like united everybody. And we haven't, had that same kind of that unity in a while, but it shows you the potency, like, people who are in literal concentration camp, who are resisting the occupation and their genocide, has inspired, the world. And you can't go back from that moment. You really can't. And so we're kind of navigating this as history is being made. And I think it's just it's a really powerful moment. It's a very terrible moment to live in. I'm not trying to like romanticize it. It's very terrible. The human costs are absolutely unacceptable. For me, I don't, personally, I can't. It's absolutely unacceptable that this is the way. Because I was chatting with a friend this morning, and they're like, "What is the military strategy of Israel?" There is no military strategy. It's just annihilation. That's it. They're not fighting anybody. They're just killing people. Like that's their military strategy, and the United States has given them a blank check and is supporting it. And in my opinion, everyone is complicit in that genocide.
Yeah, and you have the myth of Israeli invincibility has been broken for good. There's no going back. They thought they could live by the sword forever. They thought they could keep, Palestinians placated by bombing them every few years. They call that mowing the lawn, by the way. They used to bomb Gaza every few years to keep it in check. This is obviously unsustainable. It was sustainable for the world when it was Palestinians getting murdered, but now that Palestinians are striking back, suddenly it's become something that needs a solution. So Israel forever thought it could live by the sword. Now it's become obvious that the balance of power in the region is changing. And I think that's causing real panic. And that's why it's thrashing around so madly, just murdering people to try and put down any, cinder of resistance that will be inspired by what happened on October.
Yeah, trying to make it seem that, trying to send a message that any resistance is unacceptable, because killing more of you is unacceptable, kind of also glossing over the difference in how we see death versus how they see death, frankly. Because for them, they need to project an image of invincibility because of their weapon contracts and the whole, military industrial complex ties, if you want to put it that way, that they have with all these other countries and all these companies. So for them, it's seen as the worst thing, as something shameful, ties back to kind of initial ideas of Zionism needing to protect us from being victims, because being a victim of a genocide, that's what's shameful, and not the fact that we were victimized, if that makes sense. But for us, it's we just know that if we stop fighting, we would have been wiped out a long time ago. And how it's for us, it is obviously really terrible. It's very difficult. It's the testimonies that we're hearing are really harrowing. There frankly isn't a day where I don't burst into tears. None of it is to say that it's evil, because we're, contrary to how we're depicted, we don't want death. We want to be alive. We want to stay alive. But just this logic of a life constantly being at the mercy of such a brutal and savage power, like we just know that there's something better than that. And I just want to say, like, a last thing, because you were saying about how everyone is complicit. It's just it's the the colonization of Palestine, the occupation of Palestine is an international project in many ways. And so that's why Germany coming into the Superman of whatever, or like trying to protect the Zionist project using their own, national mythos and all that. All these other countries, this is how it's also, I think it unites a lot of people, because it sees that multiple governments, the French government, German government, all these other places, and even the Egyptian government even, they all had a role in this, but also you see that all these different societies of people, they have their own issues with those government, and they see how much they are oppressed, and they see how much they are being denied kind of these basic things. So it unites us to see that there's a reason why they're all united in that way, and how the end of their oppression is quite literally the end of ours. Like when Kenneth Fanny said that this is not, our conception is not a Palestinian ethnicity thing, like because we're Palestinians we're so much more amazing than everybody else. It's just, no, it's like this is a cause for all colonized people, all dispossessed people, all marginalized people.
Yeah, I think it's important to dispel any ideas that the West, United States, Canada, Australia, Europe, or the EU mostly, their loyalty to Israel is not out of some kind of historical redemption, making up for the persecution of the Jewish people for worldwide. No, it's because Israel is an outpost for Western imperialism in the region. It's the unsinkable, air carrier that they were talking about. And like Joe Biden very bluntly said, if they didn't have Israel, they'd have to invent one in the region. It's all about that. For example, when Iran was the US's best buddy, the people were anti-US, but the government was pro-US. When the revolution happened, all of that support evaporated. But with Israel, you also have a population that is amenable to the West and amenable to the US and its interests. So no matter what happens, it's a beacon of stability for imperialist adventurism in the region, and it's one of their best assets in the area. The tail does not wag the dog, and Israel would not be able to survive without this Western and US support, even though a lot of people think the other way around. But no, it's an outpost for Western interests and imperialism. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, even the logic behind this whole idea that we need to create a nation for victims of genocide doesn't hold up even with the founding of Israel, which actually rejected many Holocaust survivors because they saw them as weak.
Yep, exactly.
It wasn't only until 1967 that they began to adopt that as a sort of justification. And if that is the justification, according to the US and all these international backers, then why aren't you arming native people? Why aren't you giving us nuclear weapons, Apache helicopters? Because we were victims of genocide. Like that doesn't even hold up. So this whole idea it just falls flat on its face. And this idea also that it's this moral army that respects life. It doesn't respect life. You're killing children. You will be known as baby killers. That's all. That is what your highly trained army is only capable of doing. It cannot bring peace. It's the only language it knows is violence. And I just I want to say that because sometimes I feel like I'm going crazy, like looking at this, because you cannot appeal to their conscience. There's no conscience there. If you've stepped beyond this boundary of where you are going to use highly mechanized, weapons of war to slaughter people, to kill children, there's no going back. Like there's like, what do you go, like you've overstepped the boundary. You don't know, you're not respecting humanity. You are an inhuman force, and I don't know. Sorry, I'm just kind of like rambling, but this has got me like feeling all kinds of ways, because I just think about how Indigenous people in this context, even in this state, have never been forgiven for what we have done. As if we should ask for forgiveness. Nobody's asking for forgiveness, but because they confined us to an area which is very much like the Gaza Strip. It was a strip of land, imposed starvation conditions upon us. We broke out of that reservation and had an uprising to expel settlers who are literally killing us from the land. And to this day, there are laws on the books that have never been reversed that actually make it illegal to be a Dakota person in this state, in the state of Minnesota. That's where I'm at right now. But that was more than 150 years ago. And they refuse to allow us to celebrate our resistance. They refuse to allow us to celebrate our culture, only unless it's on their terms. And I'm not saying that's the future that faces Palestine. I think it's a much different scenario, but that's the lengths to which they will go, and the examples that exist, out there. So thank you both for joining us. I'm sorry to end it on such like a not a sad note, but it's a very kind of severe, situation that we're in, and I don't want to make light of it, but I really appreciated the website. I've been kind of tooling around. I'm gonna pull some of this for some teachers that I work with here locally for their classrooms, because it is very accessible. It's very readable for all ages. I recommend anyone go out. It's decolonizedpalestine.com. Do you guys have any like final words or final thoughts about where they can find your work beyond just the website?
All over the place. We do constantly write like guest pieces
A
for
couple of
places.
articles from Mondawise. Fathi just wrote something for The Nation that came out.
We have a good article, I think, on Scalawag. That
that's
would
the big
be
one, yeah.
that would be a good introduction to Palestine, because it kind of gives an overview of the situation right now.
Because it's through an abolitionist.
And it's through an abolitionist lens. So it ties between how like incarceration in the United States and incarceration over here, how they are, run by the same logics, and how they are basically part of the same system of oppression for all peoples.
I know, and I don't think you ended it on a bad note. I think it's all quite grave, and it's all quite, we are somewhere that's very difficult right now, emotionally, and but we do have hope, and I want to just say, whenever I manage to talk to someone in Gaza, they are very heartened by seeing the protests, seeing the outpouring of support, seeing that like even the sections of discourse makers, I guess if you want to call them, or just kind of these institutions or individuals that you normally would not expect to be pro-Palestine, and being more and more pushed to say that this is unacceptable, and feeling that we are reclaiming our humanity in that way, and the hope that we see more and more people taking these kind of direct actions against weapons companies and these shipments and such. It all matters. It's all these little insurrections, I kind of want to call it, or these like pushbacks everywhere do accumulate. And we definitely want to encourage more of that. Everyone doing whatever they can.
Yeah, like to quote Basil Araj, like basically where it's a battle of 1,000 cuts. It's not going to be one big confrontation. It's going to be thousands upon thousands of little battles that we win, little kinds of shows of force and demonstration, and proving that we're here and that we're not going away, and those eventually build over time. And there's a saying in Arabic, like if it doesn't get worse, it doesn't get better. So it will get better, and we will win.